We all know that family law cases can be complicated, which is why you and your client deserve reliable, hassle-free drug and alcohol testing services. From hair testing to abstinence monitoring, we can help. Visit lextalks.co.uk for more information.
You're listening to the Today's Family Lawyer podcast, the leading source of daily news and insight for family law practitioners in England and Wales. Sign up to our free weekly newsletter at todaysfamilylawyer.co.uk and subscribe to hear all the latest news and views from across the family law sector. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Hello, welcome along to the latest Today's Family Lawyer podcast. Today I am talking about, trauma-informed support. It's described as with Hannah, Bud and Peter Burgess. Hannah, a partner at Rosefield Divorce Consultancy, and Peter Burgess, one of the founding partners at Burgess Mee and a mediator as well. And it's a service that's been introduced or a collaboration that the two organisations are working together on with some pretty interesting results. I'm probably going to do it a disservice if I try and explain any more about it. So I'm going to throw to you guys. But in the first instance, be useful to have a very short introduction as to who you are and what you do. Peter, please first.
Hi there, I'm Peter Burgess, founding partner at Burgess Mee, a solicitors firm based in London. I'm also an accredited mediator.
And Hannah.
I'm Hannah Budd. I'm a partner at the Rosefield Divorce Consultancy, where I am a divorce consultant. Prior to that, I was a practicing family law solicitor for over 15 years, a number of which were at partner level, during which time I also co-founded my own boutique practice. I worked closely with divorce consultants during the latter years of my practicing, and I saw firsthand the value that they added to the client's experience, which is why I was very keen to be involved in that moving forward.
Well, I said that I would probably do this a disservice if I tried to explain about it. Peter, tell us about what this idea is. You've described it as within the window collaboration with the Rosefield Divorce Consultancy. Explain a little bit more about how it works.
Well, it came about as a result of a discussion between Laura Rosefield and I and some therapists. So in the world of therapy and mental health professionals, it's quite common to see the expression trauma informed. And what that means is that the way in which that particular professional is working is with one eye on and informed by their knowledge and experience of working with people who've experienced trauma. And as lawyers, family lawyers in particular, we are very much involved in working with clients who have experienced trauma, are experiencing trauma as a result of a relationship breakdown, and may experience trauma as a result of the process upon which they're about to embark. So it's always been a source of confusion, I think, to those professionals that we work with in the mental health space as to why it is that family lawyers don't feel the need to have the same safeguards in place for those working with those individuals who've experienced trauma, and why they don't have any particular training in trauma and trauma-related conditions. And we thought, in conjunction with some mental health professionals, that actually there was a space to look at it, in fact, both ways. One way is to safeguard the members of staff, safeguard ourselves in terms of the effect of vicarious trauma. So if you're working with someone who's experienced trauma, it can reflect back on you as a professional, but also thinking about it from the client experience. What's it like for that client going through a traumatic experience, particularly where they've already experienced it? We thought that more work needed to be done on looking at the service area in particular and devising a way of working which was particular for these clients.
So at the risk of paraphrasing what you've said there, this is about recognizing that going through a family case, whether it's a divorce or a child matter of some description, actually we have to recognize as professionals that the client goes through the mill with this, Hannah?
Yes, I mean, it was really interesting. When we started looking at this in more detail, we found out that there wasn't a lot of research about the impact of trauma on family proceedings. Much of the research focused around the criminal justice system, but obviously in the family justice system, the stakes are pretty high. Individuals potentially looking at the loss of their homes, their children, they're facing their abusers in court. So the research that we did find showed that 93.5% of barristers and solicitors in England and Wales working in criminal practice said that they worked with traumatised people, but only 8.7% of those said that they'd attended any kind of trauma-informed practice training. All of which we thought was quite staggering and could only be the same really in family law. And the more that we learned about it, the more we realised that it affected every aspect of family law, because trauma that a client has experienced in their childhood or within their relationships will impact them in the present day, either by way of their presentation, their decision-making abilities, their judgment, their parenting capabilities, what they're like when they're giving evidence, and ability to cope with everyday tasks. So it really can infiltrate everything. And being trauma-informed in our practice has the ability not only to vastly improve the experience that they have of the process, but also potentially outcomes as well.
It almost seems churlish to sit here and say that family professionals aren't aware of the impact of the case on their client, but your evidence seems to suggest that we're simply not taking that into account in our dealings with them. Is that right, Hannah? Or we need to be a little bit more cognizant of that?
Absolutely. I mean, the first step that, as Peter was saying, the first step in the project was that we undertook training. So Rosefield Divorce Consultancy and Burgess Mee commissioned this bespoke training, and all of our teams were trained in it. I mean, look, I've done a lot of CPD in my life, right? And, usually you are glancing down at your agenda for the day and wondering at what point you might be able to slope off. But this training was absolutely captivating. And for me, I'd observe, you observe so many behaviours in your clients over the years, and you develop your sort of workarounds, but to actually understand what was happening to them was transformational for me. Peter, I don't know if you would say the same, but I feel as though what we learned during those sessions, I apply every day to every call that I am involved with.
Completely agree. I mean, it has, as Hannah said, been pretty transformational to have just a little bit of insight from the training. And I mean, I think what's sort of most surprising perhaps about it is that often clients themselves don't realise that they're having a trauma response. So some of the behaviours that we take for granted as family lawyers, the avoidance, the fight response, the fawning over the other party, these are all trauma responses. People respond in different ways, and actually being able to identify what's going on for the client, or at least have a little bit of insight into it, is just so helpful. We'll talk a bit more about how the scheme works in a minute.
As I was saying, I mean, I think you develop sort of workarounds, you observe certain characteristics in clients. It's the classic of you getting a letter in and your client sort of exploding and it taking a few days to get them back down. I now understand that that is a fight type response to that letter, and it's now about trying to get them back into their window of tolerance. And now we have the benefit of lots of tools available to us, where either we can get them back into their window of tolerance, or ideally we keep them there the whole time, and then we tell them about what has happened. The same goes for the client that goes to ground. You can't get hold of them, you can't get instructions from them. It's a freeze response. We also need to get them back into the window of tolerance in the same way that we do for the client who's having a fight type response.
We should just explain also to the listeners that Collaboration is called within the window because it's about keeping people within their window of tolerance. So the window in the name of the collaboration is a reference to that terminology.
Having listened to what you've had to say, this almost seems pretty obvious. How is the collaboration and the training that you've received, Peter, different from perhaps something else that might be out there? You know, for example, through some of the collaborative law stuff I know you guys are fans of.
Yeah, so you might well say, well, isn't this what a good family lawyer should do? And the answer is yes. I think the difference is that having had the training and having looked at it and having received specific training from trauma specialists, we're better able and equipped to identify particular trauma responses and identify what we think will work. So as lawyers, we tend to work in straight lines. We think we have a client, the client comes to see us, we write them emails, we write them letters, we have a meeting, we do some disclosure, and as Hannah referred to earlier on, it's a bit cookie cutter. You know, there's a process. Lawyers like order, they like steps, they like routine, and we all follow the same routine. What this is intended to do is to be much more client-centered. So we're trying to identify particular things that the client might be struggling with, particular responses that they might give to particular aspects of the case, and to make adjustments or modifications to how we work. And part of that is the collaboration and the collaborative working between my firm and Rosefield Divorce Consultancy, so that we work as a team and to provide support around the client. The first step in the process is trying to identify whether the client is having a trauma response. I have to say, having had the training, the vast majority of people who make an inquiry at my firm, and I'm sure it's the same for Hannah as well, have experienced some kind of trauma. That might not be something dramatic from their past. It might simply be the trauma of experiencing the separation or the breakdown of the relationship. And a lot of people who go through relationship breakdown as a process will experience trauma to a lesser or greater degree as a result of the process itself. So it's about trying to manage that in a way which works for the client.
I think one of the things that I would say as well that I don't think I appreciated at all when I was practicing is actually what a big deal it is for clients dealing with solicitors, and that being part of a trauma. And I think that what does work well for some clients that are struggling with that is working alongside the likes of divorce consultants. There's less formality to it. You know, we are brought in as part of the team, we're involved in the strategy, we can be supporting the clients day to day, keeping them on track with that strategy that's been set. I mean, a lot of clients really struggle when they're in a state of trauma to be retaining information, and having a wider team that are working together can be an enormous support to them at what's obviously a terrible time in their lives.
Let me play devil's advocate just for one moment, because to take your point, Peter, about the legal process of divorce, that's fine. And that is the job of the lawyer, is to take a client through that legal process. Today's family lawyer listeners may be aware we have another publication in the conveyancing space. What you have in conveyancing at the moment is a real tension between doing the legal work and then doing all of the client management stuff around the periphery. Do you see that there would be any pushback here from professionals and practitioners against almost becoming kind of a bigger part of that process, rather than simply taking their client through those legal steps? I mean, you're almost kind of opening yourself up to some of the emotional aspects of the case if you're not too careful.
Yeah, what we're trying to do is, we're not therapists. We recognise we're not therapists. I mean, I'm on the board of Resolution, which is, as many of your listeners will know, an organisation of family justice professionals that believes in multidisciplinary working. And we've had, some limited training in relation to trauma support. But what we're trying to do is simply identify the trauma. It's there, we can't ignore that it's there. We're trying to make the experience better for the clients and also get them better outcomes. I mean, some of what we're going to talk about, I think later on, Hannah's going to give some examples around the preparation for hearings. Identifying a trauma response and being able to work with that client so that they give the best evidence they can in their case is going to markedly improve their chances of the outcome that they're looking for. So it's not just being a therapist, being a listening ear to someone. It's also about, can we do the best we can for this client? Can we identify what's going on for them to some extent, and then put a plan around it to try and make it better? Can we identify the particular pinch points for that client along the way, along the process? Is it going to be receiving correspondence from the other side? Is it going to be preparing for a hearing? Is it going to be just going to a solicitor's office? Are they going to find that just too difficult? And getting a better understanding of what our clients are experiencing, we're aiming to actually improve the service for them. So in response to your question, I would say it's not just opening yourself up to providing emotional support for a client, it's actually providing a better service for the client, because you're working with what's there, you're working with someone who is going through something which, like it or not, will play a part in their response to the support that you're providing them as a lawyer and as a divorce consultant.
And it's the point about working as a team and identifying where everybody's skills lie, and so within the window brings together the therapists, it brings together the lawyers and the divorce consultants, because what can happen, you're already dealing with traumatized clients, but I've seen it myself. You can end up in a situation where you have a therapist that is advising on one approach and a solicitor advising on the other. So, for example, a therapist may be telling the party, actually, you shouldn't be having any contact with your husband or wife. All communications at the moment should be through your solicitors. And look, the rationale for that can make perfect sense, but on the other hand, they're going to have their solicitor in their ear that's going to be saying, you've got young children, you are going to be co-parenting together for a long time, we want a shared care type arrangement. Whilst your therapist is right, this is not going to work in terms of the optics and strategy of our case. And you've then got a traumatized client who has got two professionals that they have an ongoing relationship with who are telling them different things. So the idea of everybody getting on board and saying to the therapist, look, we need to get the client to a point where they are able to deal with this correspondence, because that's going to help the case and the wider co-parenting, and actually also preparing them for the fact that potentially they're going to end up in a witness box giving evidence on their case, but actually everybody working together rather than the client being stuck in the middle of different people giving them different advice.
So what are the practical tools that Within the Window provides as part of its service, and Hannah?
Vacancy Legal Recruitment, a refreshingly unique and personal talent agency developed specifically for legal. Dedicated to the sector and with extensive experience working across legal services and legal technology, we bridge the gap between your requirements and top-tier legal talent. Get in touch today and say hello at vacancy.co.uk.
Well, on the website, which is available to everybody, we've got various tools that have been created by the wonderful Lou Lebentz. So a shout out to Lou. They include breathing techniques, grounding and orienteering tools. There's audio visualizations. And they've all been tailored to be quite specific to family law. So, for example, Peter was mentioning private FDRs earlier. Private FDRs are a real pinch point in the process where clients are having to take a lot in and also potentially make quite big decisions. So there's a specific breathing exercise to prepare clients for that, because traumatized clients, their sort of instincts, their decision making, that can all go out of the window. So actually getting them preparing for that in the days and weeks before can be very helpful. So we've tried to provide tools that are going to be appropriate to their cases.
And from the point of view of the firm then, Pete, how does it work? How have you managed to adopt it? How have you integrated it into your processes?
Well, as we said before, we had our entire team trained. We had a team of clinicians come into our offices and deliver training for a whole day, and we're doing that on an ongoing basis as new people join the firm, we'll rerun the training for them. So the process in terms of client management it's open to everybody. We try to have a triage process on the way in. We try to get an understanding of what's going on for the client. This might take the form of a first meeting, but perhaps instead of making them come into a solicitor's office, which they might find quite difficult, we're happy to, for example, go to their home or go to a clinic where they're receiving treatment. We try to open it up so that they can get support from either their own therapist or by a therapist with whom we work, including the team that we did the training with. I mean, the information on the website, we considered whether or not that should be for our clients only, and we decided actually we were just going to make it generally available for people. We think there are great tools there for people to use and for their clients to use. And we tried to make something that's a resource just generally for people going through this experience adjacent to our client process.
So there's a whole load of information online. Presumably clients have got access to that as well, Hannah, and they can go and have a look at that. And then how does your work with the client then develop?
Sometimes we work very much as part of the team. Sometimes we hear from clients sort of periodically checking in with us. One of the things that we do from the very beginning is sort of start preparing the client for the fact that they may very well be required to give evidence at the end of their proceedings in a witness box. So helping them understand about trauma, in conjunction with their therapist, identify their responses is all part of preparing them for that day, because I really feel as though giving evidence is an area where the trauma impacts can be really acute and they can have a massive impact on the outcomes. I mean, for example, if you've got a husband or wife who's left an abusive relationship, when they're sat in a witness box with them in the room, they might be appearing confused, they might be disorientated, they might be like, deer in the headlights. And actually, a judge might think they're evasive, if they're avoiding eye contact, if they're fidgeting, if they're speaking too loudly. All of these are actually trauma responses, but can be mistaken for other things. So actually working with a client and preparing them for giving evidence is a really important thing that we do. At the recent launch event that we held for Within the Window, I read aloud a case study from a client of ours called Charlotte, and she described in that case study how hard she found it to speak eloquently and persuasively under oath. And she is a professional woman who is adept at presenting to hundreds of people at a time. By the time she was a few years into her proceedings, which went on for 9 years in total, we had done a lot of work with her on managing her trauma responses when she was giving evidence. The difference was absolutely extraordinary, but unfortunately we got to her too late, in that by the time we met her, she had already had a fact-finding hearing where she had displayed all of those, characteristics that could be perceived as being evasive, and that set the tone for the next sort of several years. But as I said, the difference in her evidence by the end was absolutely transformational, because she knew what she needed to do to keep herself grounded, to be able to answer those questions very clearly and comprehensively.
I did another podcast recently with the Nuffield Family Justice Observatory, and what came out of that particular discussion was that there's an education piece here for the judiciary as well, isn't there? And that's a key or potential key part of this that is missing if we're not too careful.
Absolutely. From the top down, the judiciary, CAFCAS, independent social workers, everybody that is touching proceedings in the family court really ought to be coming at it from a trauma-informed perspective.
I was going to say there have been some senior members of the judiciary, including Miss Justice Francis, who's now retired, who spoke at our launch event, who have talked about this, and I think some of the Court of Appeal judges too, about the witness evidence and drawing conclusions from how a witness presents and the risks that can involve. I mean, perhaps if there was more awareness of trauma and trauma responses, the result would be that you would end up with more psychologists or psychiatric evidence about whether or not someone is genuinely experiencing a trauma response. But in my professional practice, even since the training, there have been some examples where I've seen clients really struggle in the witness box, struggle to get their point across. And we have some practice directions which help us with getting the best evidence from our clients in terms of the way the room is set up, the way they give evidence, possibly giving them questions beforehand. But this is all still quite new, I think, to us in the family justice arena. And no doubt there'll be further need for consideration of this particular aspect alongside the other aspects of vulnerable witnesses, capacity, and so on. But yes, definitely there is a need for judicial training.
We're fast moving towards the end of the discussion, and I hope listeners really take a lot away from this. I mean, I certainly have, and I think to your point, both of you have made about the fact that we're dealing with people in a state of trauma, and in that state they behave differently from how you might expect them to behave or how they might normally behave. Suddenly this all starts to make an awful lot of sense, doesn't it? I guess what I take from this in many respects is that this is another step in the direction of creating a more collaborative approach to family law, perhaps a slightly less hostile approach. Certainly, in terms of how you two in particular collaborate, perhaps listeners would be very interested to hear sort of the practicalities of that as well, and how you make that work.
I think absolutely, in terms of the collaboration between professionals, when you say collaborative, what I would say is that I am absolutely all in favour of non-court dispute resolution, and I commend all of the people that have done so much to progress it. But a lot of my clients, in particular, because we do a lot of high conflict cases, feel an enormous degree of shame that they are not able to do things nicely. And that may be for a whole myriad of different reasons. It might be because there are personality disorders at play, mental health issues. And I think it's very important that that category of people do not get overlooked in the current NCDR climate that we exist in, and we mustn't forget them, because, as I said, there is nothing that most people would like to do more than resolve matters amicably, constructively, but it is beyond some couples' capabilities.
I'd agree with that. I mean, I think the issue with the government's laudable policy attempt to move people into the NCDR space, including the changes to procedural rules that we've had over the last year, to encourage that and to give the courts a bit of teeth in relation to finding out what forms of NCDR people have considered and engaged with before they enter the court arena. I think that's all very well, but I'm speaking as a mediator here. For a lot of people, mediation, which is usually the NCDR gateway, because of the government voucher scheme, a lot of people view that as a first port of call. A lot of cases just aren't suitable, and typically those cases aren't suitable because there's a difficult personality, or there's a complex issue, or there's some trauma. And as Hannah says, we can't leave those clients behind. We have to be able to support them fully and do the best for them. And our collaboration is designed to provide basically a bespoke service for them, where we move away from just doing things by rote. I talked a bit earlier on in this discussion around how lawyers do that. Move away from a kind of cookie cutter service towards really thinking about what are the issues going to be for this client? How can we best support them? How can we get the best evidence for them? How can we make sure they get the best outcome, that they get heard, and that they're able to deal with the counterparty in their case in a way which, does justice to their situation.
Probably a topic that we could discuss for much of the rest of the day, but we have reached the end of the time for the podcast. It's been a really interesting discussion. I hope for listeners it just opens people's eyes to the possibilities, to what else is out there, and thinking about how we can better support clients as well. So thank you so much for sharing your time and your insight, both to Hannah and to Peter.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
The Today's Family Lawyer podcast is available on your preferred podcast provider. It's also available on todaysfamilylawyer.co.uk. My thanks to Hannah and to Peter. Thank you as ever for listening, and we'll see you again soon.